say, but of the people, and saying it was the best organization, the most supportive people, the best professional experience. So how could I say no?
Thank you, and thank you, Steve. Louis, thank you. That was a bit of a plant, because here's the thing. If you are getting value out of this, can we ask you, please bring friends. That is how we grow. That is how we sustain this chapter. Please come back and bring a friend with you. So thank you, Steve, for doing that. And Steve, right back to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Applause for Steve. Yes.
I got right on the table here. Very good. So a number of people come up to me and said, oh my gosh. How many people are starting to see ways that you can actually have more clients that you really want, the really good ones? You're starting to see how it's not that difficult. Let's start to talk a little more process, how you can get there. But the implications of this idea right here, that this is how humans work, and I'm telling you, a lot of times it's your personal relationships as well as your professional relationships. You're not communicating clearly, they're not telling you what really matters, and most of the time you're thinking different terms when you use adjectives or nouns. It's dangerous. If you learn how to use it, it's going to make a difference. So what this leads me to ask you is, do you understand that your job, and let's just put it this way, you need to facilitate. More than speak, coach, train, consult, you need to facilitate. And there's two specific transformations, two specific perception changes that you absolutely must create. Everybody know what they are? Interesting. Well, I can tell you, but do you recognize that asking the question, do you know what these are? These are the keys to your success. And I'm going to ask you to answer that question if you've never heard me before. Yeah. So, anybody who's never heard me before at all? Yeah, because I try and keep things really clear. It's not a, you know. So anyway. So isn't it simple? It's interesting. There's two keys to being successful as a facilitator. If you understand what they are, you can have massive success. Do you recognize you don't know what they are? And yet, you can go back and recognize this is really the nature of what we're dealing with. So what do you need to facilitate? Well, but it's a little more specific than that. Yeah, ultimately, they've got to be able to articulate your value. That's the best you could do, and that's going to begin to create what I call indispensable partner relationship. Perception number one, they must perceive that you understand what's most important to them. You recognize we got a problem just based on what we just did a few minutes ago? They need to perceive that you understand what's most important to them. Problem number one, they don't understand what's most important to them. So you already start to get what your job is, don't you? It's not to sell speaking, coaching, training, facilitating, consulting. Second perception shift. They must perceive that you can take effective action on what's most important to them. And here's another important note. You got to do it in this order. How many of you walk in and start telling them how much you can do for them that would be very effective and successful for them? That's not what works if you want to be highly successful and differentiate yourself immediately, because everybody who they hire to do the work that they're asking you to quote on is going to go in and tell them who they've worked for, how much they've done it, what's special about their metrics. And the client's sitting there going, they don't even know what I need. Oh, most of them don't recognize they don't know what they need. But do you realize this is the dilemma we find ourselves in with most people we're dealing with as clients? They're so busy. And I'll tell you what, having been in business for 26 years now, the last 10 years are the worst I've ever seen in terms of quality of thinking. Absolutely the worst. Most people, and I'm talking about really successful, really smart, really capable, really good executives, do not think enough. They don't know what's most important. And I do a lot of work on leadership as well. And leadership is about ensuring you understand what's most important, and your organization does too. And oh, by the way, they're too busy to think about that. So right away you can differentiate yourself massively by helping them get clear about what's most important. And then, by the way, you've just fulfilled perception shift number one. Guess what? Almost nobody's doing that. You want to differentiate yourself? You've already demonstrated massive value. My first Fortune 500 engagement, They'd been searching for 6 months for somebody to market IT services. And they were looking for a 2 or 3 or 4 day seminar. I got in there by accident. The story doesn't matter. But when the client who was going to refer me someplace else said, tell me what you do so I know who to refer you to, what would you say? Because this is the pivot point of your conversation. So this person who was a friend of mine said to me, tell me what you do so I know who to refer you to. What's your answer, folks? I'm going to give you 15 seconds to think of yours. This will make or break your business. What do you say? How many people think elevator speech time? I'm not asking you to raise your hand. You don't want to be embarrassed. So what do you say, folks? How do you answer a question like that? I was referred to this person by somebody who knew he was doing her a favor.
Who do you know is dealing with a really tough challenge?
Say it again, Steve.
Who do you know that's dealing with a really tough challenge?
That's a pretty good question. Anybody else? Folks, the reason I keep asking these questions without giving you the answers is you begin to realize there's certain critical questions that you need to be able to answer for yourself, but you also need to be able to ask your clients. And you need to do it in a way where you don't just demonstrate you're the font of all knowledge, but you help them recognize how critical it is to answer a really important question and recognize they don't have the answer to a really important question, so they want the answer to that really important question, and then the value of your knowledge, answer, insights, and expertise will be valued. There's an old axiom I do all the time, and it goes like this. In this context of high-value relationships, being right is insufficient for being effective. Being right is insufficient for being effective. Anyone who's married knows what I'm talking about. You want to be right, or do you want to be effective? Rob.
You want to be right and be happy, but to answer your question about what you would say to someone saying, how shall I refer you?
Tell me what you do so I know who to refer you to. That's exactly what he said.
I help people close the gap between what they want and what they really need.
And how well is that working?
I'm just making it up now.
Okay. We'll hear one more.
Just this one even about this morning, I would say, I also what was inside myself to say how good through challenges and values.
And does that work well? See, again, one of the things, Rob, I'm going to tell you, here's an axiom. It's not in your notes. This is a bonus point. You said, I help clients. First of all, one of my basic premises, if you want to learn to think differently and think from the client's point of view, stop using the words I, me, and we and whatever you're saying about yourself. So when you're not talking about yourself, but you're talking about them, you got a lot more attention from them. But if you say, I help, I do, I've survived, I thrived, I create, whatever it is, it's about you. You're the subject of the conversation. It's not the subject that they're interested in. And when you start to say, I help people bridge the gap, meet their challenges, unless they're thinking about that, my analogy is, if we put a dartboard at the other side of the wall here, and we started throwing darts at it, there's a chance that every now and then we'd hit the bullseye. My premise is, I don't want to throw it across the room. I want the dartboard to be about here. I want to know I'm hitting the bullseye. And the best way to do that is to make sure they know what the bullseye is and they've told me. See, the interesting piece about this process is you've got to help them get clear. And by the way you do that is already a demonstration of your value, your uniqueness, your differentiation. And by doing that, you get to be there when they figure it out. So you're the one who's going to be able to propose the right solution to the real issue. What a concept. Everybody else is chasing off and writing proposals about what they were told the client said he wanted. Where she said, this is what we're trying to do. And that's insufficient. You don't differentiate yourself. You don't demonstrate value. You don't make them clear that you are something special, not just an expert speaker, coach, consultant, facilitator. Make sense? Common sense? So here's what I said. I said, rather than give you a laundry list, what are some of the biggest challenges you're dealing with? And I'll show you what we do with them. So it's scheduled for 5 minutes. It's legendary in this company. 15 minutes later, he goes, hold on. He was supposed to refer me to some other department. He said, hold on, we need this. He calls me later in the afternoon, can you be in here in 3 days to meet with my boss? We spent an hour and 5 minutes with his boss. He stands up, shakes my hand, and said, if my people could do with their clients what you just did with me, we'd have no problems. And he said, can you come back? Can you put a proposal together and come back next Monday? And I said, sure. I was young. I would still do proposals. And I walk in. These two guys are sitting on one side of the table. I'm the other. The CIO walks in. He talks with me for about 10 minutes. He turns to them and goes, I'd never worked with a Fortune 500 client before in my life. I was an entrepreneur. I built a $10 million business. And he said, guys, you know, I talked to him. He's a good guy. I'm going to go with your suggestion. They both went, we want him. Now, here's what happened. They had spent 6 months researching IT marketing consulting firms. And they were looking for a 2 or 3 or 4 day training. And they had spent enormous time. He had 6 meetings with the #2 competitor. Because they went to research. They went and sat in their webinars and their seminars, and they went to see their programs. First of all, I didn't have a program. I had a concept for a program. I had been teaching these things for a long time to my people, but I didn't have a program. But I said to him, he said, you know, what's your most important result? Well, we need to, he gave me the answers, and I said, you're looking for a 2 or 3, 4 day training? He said, yeah, that's what we've been researching. And I said to him, what do you guys know about a 2 or 3 or 4 day training where the result is to save your organization? What do you know? That's probably not the best approach. I said, have you ever had lasting results from a 2 or 3 or 4 day training? He said, not really. I said, I'd suggest something different. So everybody else had been researched. He just had an hour and 5 minutes with me, 40 minutes of which was me asking him questions, getting him to recognize some of what he was asking for didn't make sense. And that was the beginning of a 7-year relationship that was worth 7 figures. Because I didn't answer the question, well, I help clients improve their performance and meet their challenges and bridge the gap and all that. What's your biggest challenge? And I'll talk about how we'd handle that. And oh, by the way, what you're asking for as a solution probably won't work. Saying nicely. Make sense, folks? Make sense? Common sense? You see the differentiation? I'd never even worked with a client like this. And they seeded probably 5 of my next 10 biggest clients over the years. That's what the differentiation factor is about. It's not about me talking about what I did. I had to go figure out what I was going to do. But what I was going to do is deliver the result that he needed most. I didn't talk about what I do. I talked about what he needed. Make sense? Common sense? Are you starting to get it now? You want to start to apply it to your people? All right, let's move on here. So, what is your job? And this is in every single one of you. It's the same answer for every single one of you. The hint has been given already. What is your job in all roles for achieving all significant results? If you understand this, you've changed your business already. And then I'll show you some details about how to do it better. What's your job, folks? What's that? Provide value. Yes, that's the end result of doing your job.
Solve the client's problem.
Uncover their value. You're moving in the right direction.
Solve the client's problem.
Solve the client's problem. Yes, that's what you get to do if you win. Change behavior, that's what you get to do if you win. What's your job? And this is really key to your getting the job. Because most of us can deliver if we get the chance, true?
Be a facilitator.
Thank you, Steve. So your job is to be a facilitator of what's most important to the other person, to the client, to your spouse, to your kids. Your job is to be a facilitator of what's most important. If you want to be effective, provide impact, and deliver value, your job is to be a facilitator of what's most important to the other person. Let's talk clients in this case. Your job is to be a facilitator of what's most important to your client. Because anything else that you do is going to inhibit your opportunity to get that client and to get really clear that that client needs you and to differentiate yourself and to provide the opportunity to significantly stand yourself above all your competition in your first conversation. Make sense? Common sense? Your job, regardless of whether you're the CEO of a major corporation, you're a speaker trying to get the business going, you're anybody in between. Your job is to be a facilitator of what's most important to the other person, because we already know everything that you're going to do to be successful is based on the value you create. And the key to your value is in their mind, and in their mind it's not very clear. So take a deep breath in. Exhale. One more deep breath. Do you realize this is simpler than we thought? It doesn't mean easy, but Leonardo da Vinci once said, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. Your job is to be a facilitator of what's most important to the other person. If you do that well, you've already separated yourself from all your competition, and you understand what you're there to do. And they don't care about how you do it if they trust you to know what's most important to them because you help them figure it out. And here's the interesting piece. I want to go back here for a second. They must perceive you can take effective action on this. If you start talking about that first, there's a good chance you've lost the opportunity because they know you don't know what's important to them. However, if you do the first one well, help them get clear about what's most important to them, they almost always automatically assume you can help them take care of what's most important. Let me say that again, folks. Does that make sense? If you do the first part well, help them get clear about what's most important, they almost automatically assume you can do something about taking care of what's most important. And we spend most of our time trying to do that. And they've already got a certain level of disbelief and disconnection when you start telling them about what you do and how you do it and who you've done it with. They don't really care about that. And they don't really care about you. And they don't really care to know how you do it because they probably don't understand it anyway. What they care about is what's important to them, and most of the time they don't even know what it is. Have we made our point, yes or no? Have we made our point? Yes. This is very serious. We are changing the entire way you think and operate if you do this well. Let me ask you a question. Is this how it flows with your best client? Yes or no? Yeah, because you're always talking about what's most important to them. You're not talking about how you're going to do it. They expect you to deliver. Your most challenging client, you're spending all your time trying to convince them you know how to do what they keep asking you for. Yes or no? And do you recognize why it fails? Okay, let's talk about how to do this really, really well. What's your job? You know what your job is. Your job is to be a facilitator of what's most important, and that's how you differentiate yourself, stand above, know what's important to be done, help them know what's important to be done, and they decide to choose you, and they don't even care what you charge a lot of the times because they recognize how important it is. Now, don't go around walking like, I'm going to get paid and they're not going to ask me. It just happens when you do this really, really well, when the value proposition is so clear, it's not an issue of money anymore. It's an issue of how fast can we get it going. All right, let's go on here. So what differentiates you? Clarity about WIMI. What does WIMI stand for? What is most important? The most important question you can always ask is what's most important about this, whatever it is that they're talking about. What is most important is the most powerful question you can usually ask if there's not clarity present. Secondly, 50 choices dilemma, paradox, we already talked about it. If they're not working on priorities number 1, 2, and 3, they're not going to be a big success. If you're working on anything less than priorities 1, 2, and 3, you're not going to be very valuable. The value of their important outcomes. If they don't see their important outcomes and they don't articulate the value, and I'm going to show you in just a minute exactly how to do that, then you're not going to get paid for value. And I'll tell you what, here's the difference. The value of the results is worth multiples of any process or activity you have, no matter how unique it is. If your unique process or activity doesn't deliver a massive result that's valuable to the client, it makes no difference. The only thing that matters is the value of the result, which is worth multiples, multiples, folks, not percentages, multiples of any activity or process. And your facilitation in generating their clarity is the key distinguishing factor that makes you unique, different, and the special one that they want to work with. It all comes back to your ability to facilitate what's most important to the other person and understanding the dynamics and the power of that. When they get it, when they understand it, when they can articulate it, when they know it, and they can say it, it's worth magnitudes 10 to 100 times more than if you tell them what it is, even if you're 100% right. We call that the expertise trap. Experts know what the outcome is, and they know the value of the outcome. The client doesn't even know what the question or the process should be, or the outcome should be. So your ability to help them see the value of the outcome is what differentiates you, helps them bridge the gap, and makes you more successful. Obstacles to success, these are fun. Lack of engagement. You don't even have rapport with them. And the best way to get rapport is to talk about something that matters to them, not what I do or I help or I support or I change. Not knowing what's important to your client, which also means the client doesn't know what's important to them. These are your biggest obstacles. The client focuses on unimportant or less important results, which we know happens 80 to 90% of the time. Let me hear a yes, it is like that. So if your clients know exactly what's most important to them, let me say that differently. If your clients know when they tell you they want something, it's not what's most important, say yes, it is like that. Do they know what's important to them? No. Okay, so that's the point. Sorry about confusing you. I'm moving fast because I've got a lot I still want to do with you here. Is this making sense, common sense to everybody?
Yes.
Are you starting to realize why your best clients are the way they are and your most challenging clients are the way they are? We're going to give you a chance to work on it. You prematurely move to action. They ask you to speak, coach, train, whatever it is, and you go, I can do that, I've done that, I'm an expert at that, here's my contract. You prematurely move to action. Value is more important than action. And if you don't establish the value, no matter how much action you deliver and how many results you deliver, you still don't get credit for the value. You can deliver massive results, but the amount of value that they ascribe to those results is dependent on how much value they thought they'd get when they started. Let me say that one again. You can deliver massive results and massive value for the results, but if they don't think about how much value you're going to get when they start, the amount of value that they ascribe to your results is far less. And the client doesn't recognize your value. If that's the case, you probably don't have a client. The client's unable to articulate and measure your value. If they can't say this is what it is themselves, not have you tell them, it's not as good as it needs to be. Are you clear about how to change these now? Yes or no? Yes. Okay, let me talk you through a process here. So here's my indispensable partner university axiom. You already heard it. Being right is insufficient for being effective. Everyone who's married knows what I'm talking about. We want to be effective, right? And no matter how much you tell them and no matter how right you are, it makes no difference. So these are the critical mindset shifts, right? The impact and value expands when your client understands what's most important to them. This should be a review at this point. I'm going to show you the step-by-step process to do this. Make sense? By the way, in the front page of your handout, which is actually the second page of content, if you want a copy of the PowerPoint, you can send me an email with that request, or you can simply hand me a card and say PPT on it, and I'll make sure you get it. All right? So you don't have to be writing like crazy. You can have a copy of it. Your greatest credibility, impact, and value, is that what we're looking for? Credibility, impact, and value? Comes from what? Facilitating with them so they can articulate what's most important to them. Your credibility, impact, and value comes from facilitating with them so they can articulate your impact and your value. And it's much more important for them to do it than for you to tell them. And how strongly do you agree that questions have more impact than statements? You know, here's the difference between telling somebody. If I tell you, listen, this is the best information you can possibly have, most people take declarations or statements sort of out here. They're going to let me think about that. But if I say, how valuable is this in transforming your business, I'm in your head already. So just understand the dynamics of questions versus statements. And you can make a statement with a question, but it's far more powerful because you don't want them blocking it and considering it before they take it in. You want to be in their mind, working the questions and the structure of how you want them to be thinking about you in the way you ask the questions. So these are some basic pinpoints. So I'm going to ask you for questions, and then we're going to go into what I call the best lessons. Wrap up?
Yeah. Steve, you mentioned before about people don't like to be probed, but now you're saying ask a lot of questions. How do you differentiate that?
Oh, my goodness. I love this question. So first of all, Rick, is it important to really understand the difference between probing and questions? You can read his body language. He's going like this. That's the difference between probing. Rick, isn't it more important to be able to get these questions right? Don't you think that's the right way to go about doing it? That's probing. Yeah. Ooh, I didn't like that. Right? So it's the way you do it. You need rapport for one thing. I mean, there's a whole lot to this. This is a digest just to give you a way to think about it differently. I'm going to give you some specific steps and questions you can use. But if you don't think about it differently, you're going to go back to your old ways. When you get to the edge of being successful, they're about to give you the deal, and you're going to go back and deal with your own ways. But the difference between probing and questioning If you're there to facilitate what's most important to them, and that's your process focus and outcome, it's not going to be taken as probing. So when somebody says we're looking for a 2 or 3 or 4 day training to really market IT services, it's not like, really, is that what you're trying to do? No, it's like, and what's the most important result you're trying to achieve by doing that? Because I don't want the process, I want to sell the result. Well, we need to transform the business. He had very specific outcomes. And I said, is that the best way to do it in your own experience of having done these kinds of things? It's like, whoa. The other 6 people we looked at for the last 6 months kept offering us these programs, 2 and 3 or 4 day trainings. Huh. Why do it differently? It's a conversation in the interest of identifying, illuminating, and articulating what's most important and valuable to them. And if it's about what's most valuable to them, it's never going to be feeling like it's probing. Make sense? Common sense? Yeah. Sir?
So I want to follow up on Rick's question. I've noticed today that you often preface by, let me ask you a question.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm guessing that those words come out of your mouth quite a bit because you're wanting to learn and facilitate. But I also think that there's a moment that I've experienced, not with you, but where if someone's asking me repeated questions, I begin to feel, you can call it probed, you can call it grilled,
Right.
but there's some way in which I get a little defensive, and I wonder how you avoid that with this facility.
So I've got 2 questions for you, Rob. Number 1, have you felt like that this morning?
At times I felt like you've asked me questions in which I feel you know the answer you're looking for, and that's not the kind of facilitation that works for me.
Gotcha. Okay, so sorry about that. And have you ever imagined a world without hypothetical situations? So, to your point,
I can simplify my question. How many questions in a row do you feel makes for a good facilitated
so here's the criteria. I'm going to shift your question because in order to answer it appropriately, it's not how many questions you ask. It's how valuable you are being in providing the client insight into what they really want. And you can ask 50 questions continuously if they're getting value from the questions. If they're not getting value from the questions, you're in trouble, whether it's 1 question or 15. Make sense to everybody? The quality of the questions in delivering value to your client is your meter, not how many questions you ask. And generally, in a good conversation, it's a continuous set of questions. That hour and 5-minute meeting that turned into 7 years of business with my all-time favorite client of all time, and I've worked for 26 years across many organizations, came because for the first 40 minutes it was really inquiry. What are you trying to accomplish? What have you done to try and get there? What makes that so important? And he's going and going and going, and then he goes, wow, wow, oh my gosh. So what would you do? He's already clear about what's most important to him. Now he's talking solution. Now he's interested to hear it. If I'd started there, first of all, I didn't know where to start because I didn't know what he wanted. But Rob, does that make sense? It's not the amount of questions, it's the quality of the questions and delivering value to the client. Your job is to be a facilitator of what's most important to them. To the degree that you're doing that, you're valuable. They don't care how many questions you ask. When it starts being a question, and so Rob, I'm also going to say, I may have said, let me ask you a question. Normally, what I would say is, would it be useful to know the answer to this question? Because I don't want it to be, let me tell you. So I try and take I, me, and we out of it. This is a really different program than I tend to do because I'm trying to give you all value in a condensed period of time.
Which you are.
Thank you. So normally I don't want to say, I'd like to, can you tell me more about that? No, it's like, would it be useful for you to dig a little deeper in that so we could make sure you understand what's most valuable to you? Now there was a we in there, but you know, it's them, 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 and them, and it's about their value. Make sense? Common sense? All right, let's go on. Best lessons so far. I want you to capture at least 2 or 3 things. There's a spot there, a couple of them. What have you learned? And more importantly, how will you apply these? And I want you to think about your most important outcome that you wanted with a client opportunity that's in front of you. And don't start listing all the things I said. List out the 2 or 3 things you're going to do differently. Because if you do 2 or 3 things differently, you know, it's like going to a great restaurant. You don't order everything on the menu. You choose what you're going to eat the first time. Let's have this appetizer, this entree. Well, it's most people, Dennis.
Get the carbonara.
Yeah, get the carbonara. But again, you know, choose what you're going to work on. Do something that's going to change the dynamics of the relationship you have with this big opportunity coming up. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to do that. What's that? Did you get it from her? Yeah. So if people are writing, who'd like to share one of your best lessons? Megan's going to get the microphone and bring it to you.
Okay, I knew you had it.
Megan, how about Nick?
Nick, okay.
Best lessons, because sometimes sharing with other people, just one specific and how you're going to use it.
Help the client discover what's most important for them.
Right. You're welcome, Nick.
This is probably pretty recent, but basically engaging with the client and dancing with the client with questions and answers. And I say dancing because I have to do it in a way that I'm comfortable. So I look at it as something that I would want to answer the same question that I'm asking someone else.
Right.
So you brought up something that the last speaking engagement I got came from that. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
It's, and I didn't know what I did. So.
Well, here's the thing. When you're
I'm sure there's
successful,
more.
you know, this is why sometimes you learn the most from the challenges and your failures. I always told my kids, it's not a failure if you've learned something useful. It's a failure if you keep repeating it. So, but again, when you're successful, as you said, you don't know what you did. When you have a failure, you have a challenging client, you begin to see what the gap is, don't you? You don't know what's important to them. They don't know what's important to them. You're still fighting to get a conversation, and you haven't set a context about that conversation that they'd be interested in.
Value is greater than the type of engagement.
Value is greater than anything. But you also got to have a process to get to the value, and I'll share that a little bit with you. Rob, thank you.
Questions that the client senses you're asking to facilitate, not promote, and that by considering your questions, they are being engaged in meaningful and productive inquiry.
Right. Thank you, Rob. It's so important. Whatever you're doing, they should be seeing the value. You're not there to convince them. You're not there to make them do something. You're not there to sell them something. You're there to help them understand what would be valuable to them. And oh, by the way, you may discover it's not what you can give them, in which case, make a referral. But many times you know exactly what you need to give them to be successful. Anybody else? Best lessons? Go ahead.
I think you just got to it when you said it might be a referral. So when you're asking them what their biggest challenges are you putting any context around that as it relates to leadership people? I mean, you're not going to build them an LMS. You're not going to build them a software solution, right? So there is some framing around why you're having the initial conversation.
Well, first of all, one of the key skills that you need to have, and I'm going to mention it, I'm not going to have time to really work on it, is what I call context setting. You know, it's like how you frame a picture. There's no frame, there's no pictures in the room. Lovely. But you know, a different frame on the same picture makes a picture look different. Context is actually creating a frame of reference for your conversation that the client wants to be a part of. So we don't walk in with a blank slate. You know, if I'm talking to a CEO, I know I probably get a different conversation than if I'm talking to a CIO. And if I'm talking to a department head, I probably get a different conversation than if I'm talking to the head of HR. So I already know something about the types of concerns these people have. So it's not what's your biggest challenge. If I ask that question, it's often in the context of what they're doing. And you have to ask a question that they want to answer. They don't want an inquisition, to your point. They don't want questions. They want something that's going to illuminate what matters to them. They want, as long as you're illuminating what matters to them with your questions, they're thrilled. When it looks like it's information gathering for you, they're not very thrilled. Yeah. Nelson?
I was going to say that the more you talk, the less effective you are.
been doing that all morning. The more you talk, the less effective you are because you're asking them the questions.
Right.
In my real estate business, I say more sales are lost by a job out of an ass, but that's another whole story.
Well, it's actually interesting. My last post was a picture of the Dalai Lama in one of his quotes. He said, if you're talking, you're just saying what you know. If you listen, you might learn something else. Yeah. Anybody else? Okay, so let's go on. Everybody clear? You got some? How many people have some step forward in their most challenging engagement? Say, yes, I do. Yes, I do. All right, good. Let's talk about specifics about how to do that. So we're going to apply the principles and practices, and you know what you're specifically going to do, and we've got questions and thoughts. So here's where we go. Value proposition makeover. So I want you to think about this. I'm going to do one in front of the room, and I'm going to give you a chance to have a real quick, short conversation with somebody else, just to see what it's like to open a conversation with somebody. So what's your value proposition in this situation, and who wants to dramatically improve your value? Who wants to be a volunteer? Okay, Megan's close, so we'll take you since you were generous enough to contribute. Did you bring the microphone up here?
I even did bring the microphone with me, yes.
Would you come on up here
so
people can see you?
Okay.
I'll put this down because I don't need it. So obviously, we've got a professional here with a tremendous amount of experience and capability to transform the customer experience for somebody. Would you come here just so we're in a good shape here?
Sure.
And then you and I can talk to each other.
Okay.
They can listen.
All right.
So what's the situation you're working on that you want to have greater impact, more value, and to win?
It's a company that has had a couple of false starts with customer experience programs, but they've got some new executives.
Right.
And my contact is someone who's a couple levels down from them, but is trying to help me get in and get these executives more up to speed on what they can do and how to be effective in it faster.
Okay. So we see a certain kind of problem here. We're not talking to the decision maker, right? But we need to help that person help us, right? Help me, help you get to that person. So what's your avenue of approach to doing that? Because again, she's got to create value for the person she actually has a conversation with, right? And what's the greatest way to create value for a client? It's an interesting question. What's the greatest way to create value for a client?
Help them understand what the most important result is.
Help them do that for their client, right? You want to help your client? The best thing you can possibly do is help your client help their client. True? If I'm working with a CEO, it's not the CEO's results I care about, it's the results of his or her organization. So it's like, yes, you can do this, yes, you're good at that, but how's it showing up in your organization? So you're dealing with somebody who has the capability to help you get into the organization. They need a value proposition strong enough to get you in front of a decision maker.
Yeah.
How do you go about doing that? And I want you to be thinking about your context and your challenge in the same way we're having this conversation.
I offered to, it helps that the executives are local, the other person is not.
Right.
Just go in and sit down and say, you know, pick my brain. Have a half an hour and...
So if he likes you a lot, he will. If he knows you've got information that he doesn't have, he might. Right? But the question is, how are you going to get him to get you in front of, is it him?
It's a him, and he is someone I know well and who knows me really well.
Got it. So you've got credibility, fortunately. That's rare, actually, most of the time.
But his executives don't know me.
Okay. So the key question is, would it be helpful to help you get this moving with your executives? Isn't that a good first question?
Yeah.
Would it be helpful for you to get this moving with your executives? Not, would you like to pick my brain? People call me and say, I'd like to pick your brain. I said, that'll take 10 seconds. You know, but seriously, you see the difference?
Yeah.
Would it be helpful to help you get this kind of idea in front of your folks, your senior executives? What would be compelling to the senior executives that this person knows about already? Because again, that's where it's going to start to move to, right? The way we structure it and set context is going to determine how much impact and how deep and how far and how fast we're going to go.
He knows that they want to get smart about the domain and the industry really fast.
Got it. Okay.
So I said, well, I've been in this space for 13 years. I'd be happy to sit down and have a conversation with them about what I know about the industry that's most important to them.
So I want to go back to this concept of the gap. What's the high-value destination that this company really probably wants? This person knows that his bosses want and that this company needs. They've failed a few times already, so there's probably a higher level of need, right? So keep it simple, because most of the time we walk right by the answer.
Yeah. They want more loyal customers, basically.
Right. Ah. So the question for your friend, your colleague, your referral is, if you went to your executives and asked them, how can you get more loyal customers faster, what would they say? Is that the powerful question? You know, this person probably knows more than Megan does, even though she's the expert. Right? So it's got to be valuable for him to present to the people that are his clients, who are his executives.
Yeah.
And then here's the point about the gap. If what they're trying to get, if that truly is their high-value destination, more loyal customers, faster and cheaper, I'm going to add that to it also.
It's
right?
always, yeah.
It's always there. Yeah,
Faster
right.
and cheaper is
We
always
know
there.
certain things are always there, right? So if getting more loyal customers faster and cheaper is really the important outcome, I'm going to challenge that that's a preposition, but it's a good entry point. How are they doing getting it? So that's a really important question, because if that looks like that's a good destination, let's get more loyal clients faster and cheaper. But the next question that's going to really demonstrate whether this is viable or not is how are they doing making that happen? Because all of a sudden it's like, yes, this is what we want, but ooh, this is where we are. Then the question comes up, can you help us? Not the question come up, can I help you? But they start asking, can you help us with that? But here's the question, if they want more loyal customers faster and cheaper, what's the outcome that's going to produce for them? What's the most valuable outcome that will produce for them?
I know I'm walking right past the answer, but it's basically a profitable company.
Versus what do they have now?
A company that was just taken over that is at risk of declining.
Okay, so we know this is pretty important information, isn't it? So how much certainty do you want that we're going to be able to escalate our growth by creating loyal customers faster and cheaper, and escalate our growth and our profitability and our sustainability? So what do you want? You want more loyal customers faster, or do we want to ensure the growth and acceleration and sustainability of our company? You start to see the difference?
Yeah.
So don't mistake the process for the outcome. Is this making sense to everybody? You start to see, even just with the information, you really haven't had the conversation about the executives. But now you can help your client go to the executives and say, listen, we're on a quest for sustainability, for growth, for profitability. And we've had some setbacks. Would you be open to discussing how we can turn that around, especially by getting more loyal clients faster and cheaper? That's pretty compelling, isn't it?
Aren't those outcomes, though, or like sustaining growth, isn't that always kind of a given? Or are you saying it's a given, but you still need to talk about
Well,
it?
let me just say this. One would hope it's a given. But I can't tell you how many executives I've talked to who are not focused on that. Right? That the obvious is often missing. And the obvious is really what's most important here. So you've got to get them talking about it.
Okay. Yeah, that
And
makes
again,
sense.
all we're proposing is that this is a possible step forward as a value proposition. Make sense? What we need to do is then have the conversation in a facilitated way, not assuming we know the answer. But you're having to do it through an intermediary. So you're going to have to teach him a couple of really good questions and some high-value outcomes for him to query about. Probably as part of his job. That's the good news.
Yeah.
Right? And then it's, would you like to talk to an expert who's even better than I am at this? Is probably his last and best question you want him asking.
Oh, yeah, and that's ultimately part of what he wants personally is to look good. And to look
Do
good
we
in his
know what
job.
her client, her direct client wants? Oh, by the way, that's usually the direct result most of your clients want for their boss or their clients. So let's ensure that this question and these sets of questions will make you look good to your boss. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
That helpful?
Yes, very.
Give her a hand. Yeah. All right, let me take you through a real quick process here so that I give you some more specifics to work with. And again, you're going to don't get carried away writing down the answers, but it's what I call, whoa, that's not the right one. It's what I call the value chain process. You're going to want the PowerPoint. Don't try and fill in the blanks. It's there. This is where there's small type. I hate doing this, but I wanted to give you real specifics. There's 3 steps in the process. The first is identify the objectives. And we're doing that so that your client can download. What do we mean by that? We know something right now. The objectives are probably not the high value outcome they're looking for. The objectives are what's on the front of their mind. True? Here's some of the questions. Well, this is, I'm sorry, I'm getting carried away here because I want to make sure you get this. There's 3 steps to the value chain process. We're generating clear objectives. And the objectives we know are not what it is that they probably need most. Those are the obvious points we raised, Megan. Mm-hmm. But those are probably deeper points. But those are a good start. And those are probably in the front of their mind. And we also know those are probably not the most valuable outcomes. The second step is then to take this to the point where we establish meaningful measurements of success. What I'm going to tell you about this is that we don't just say, how do we measure the success of this project? Because within the context of an organization, and most of us work for organizations of some sort, the project you're doing may have even this much value, but we want to know what the measurements of success of their entire organizational structure are, because then we have more opportunities to deliver more value. True? So it makes sense? So we want not just the measurements of success of their project with us, but we want the measurement of success that they use for their entire business, because hopefully our project can be a bigger driver than they're even thinking it could be. And wow, we got that much more value, not just the value of the project, but the value of moving their business forward. And the third part is determining the value worth investing in. I'll give you my simple metric before we even get there. I basically say if you can't get 100% return on investment in the first year, you probably shouldn't hire me. And if you can, why are we even discussing the price? Because a good return on investment in major corporations is 25%. And I'm saying first year, and I guarantee you'll have continuing return on investment. So let's assume that we can establish a return on investment and the value worth investing in. If it's not 100%, don't buy me. If it's 100% or more, why do we even need to talk about the price? Because I'm going to guarantee you 100% return on whatever you invest. And they start to drool. All right, so here's the process. Clear objectives. So let's remember something. Whatever they tell you is probably not it. But we need to give them a chance. We're not there to fight with them and correct them. We're there to help them engage deeper and faster. So what we're talking about here is questions that elicit their objective. What would you like most to accomplish? Right? Simple. What are the most important results you're focused on this quarter, this year? You've got to know what they're thinking about. Some people, it's rare that anybody goes beyond a year now. Those are good leaders. What are the biggest opportunities that you want to take advantage of? Remember we talked about the bell curve? What's the next question, obviously? What's the biggest challenges you want to mitigate? And then what would be the most important for you and your team to accomplish during the time we're working together? So these are just basic questions. It's in the PowerPoint. You can have it there. Does it make sense? That's going to get them to download the information that's on the top of their mind. True? And we need to see what that is, because we're not there to argue with them, correct them, or change them. We're there to get them into the process of seeing better and deeper and thinking about what really matters. So the second step, once we have that, is establishing meaningful measurements of success. And what I mean by that, it's the metrics that almost always change the objectives. So this is their self-correction process. They gave you the objectives. We're not telling them the metrics. We're asking them for the metrics. But recognize something. When they start to give you the metrics, it almost always changes their objectives. They're doing the change, not you. Make sense? Common sense? Yeah. So the thing is, we focus on measurements that matter in their business, not in your project. They're bringing you in to speak, or they're bringing you in to coach an executive, or they're bringing you in to consult on some strategy. The point of it is, how does that fit in driving their overall business is really the important question. So here's some of the questions you could ask. Number one, when this is successful, whatever your project is, what measurements are you going to use to quantify that success? That helps them to get it clearer, and part of that clarification, they begin to change their objectives. What are the most important metrics you use in your business, not in a project, to quantify progress and success? Now we're starting to get to a deeper level of them revealing what it is that they're focused on. Because depending on where they are in the organization, they know more or less about what those are. The third one, are these the most important results you and your team are committed to achieving? What have we just done? We've just put the curve in the railroad. They're going 100 miles an hour, and you begin to realize, are those the most important results that you're committed to achieving? Well, that's not really what our strategic plan says, but that's what everybody's asking for. Well, what's the most important results, your strategic plan or what they're asking for? You help them make the change from this is what I need to, oh my gosh, maybe that's not what I need. Strategic impact. How will you know that you've achieved the most important business results? Now we're starting to get them down. What's the quantification of your most important business results? Not what happens if I give the best speech you've ever had or I have the best training you've ever had. Starting to see something here? You're helping them articulate this by the quality of your questions. And how well are your current measurements working? This is another one of those, oh my gosh, we're looking at the wrong things. But they're telling you that. You need to find that out because you don't know if they are or they're not. Oh, by the way, most of them don't know either. That's why it's critical to really ask those kinds of questions. So once you've got this, they're going, oh my gosh, this is what's really important, and we're not measuring that. You see something? You're starting to not only have an opportunity to have differentiated yourself massively, provided tremendous value before they've ever hired you, but you're opening up the door to many more opportunities with them because you know what the real issues are. Everybody say, wow. No, real wow. Isn't that true? It's not just you're there to sell whatever it is you're there to sell, but now you're starting to see all the different issues that they're dealing with, and they're revealing them to you because you're asking them good questions that are valuable for them.
Can you give an example of how someone answered these questions?
Well, I gave you the story of this. I'm looking for a 2 or 3 or 4 day training to transform our culture and to be more customer-centric. And I said, well, first of all, let's look at your process, because the process is usually where the problem starts. The problem starts with the process is aiming towards a result that doesn't make any difference. So we got to get them to think about the process. That's sometimes easy. So this is the way I'm building a bridge. Here's my outcome. Doesn't make sense. But here's what I'm doing. So what's the chances of success? Not very much. I'm going to go down the chasm. So I would try a different process. But let's get clear that where you're trying to get to is going to be meaningful. So what they got to is they needed to transform. So let me give you the specifics of that. So they were in a position where they used to own a certain portion of their client's budget. And then they were put into a separate business unit. So now I didn't own any of your budget. And by the way, 48% of my clients were complaining about the price, and I couldn't survive on the internal transfer price. We call it a perfect storm. And they had 1 year to fix it. So they were potentially going to go out of business if they didn't fix it, and they're looking for a 2 or 3 or 4 day training. I'd do something different. So first order, we need to get them to survive, which includes increasing their price, reducing the complaints. So here's what happened over a year, because it wasn't going to happen in a 2 or 3 or 4 day seminar. The biggest client engagement I ever written to that point. And what they did is we ended up increasing their prices by 50% in 12 months. We reduced complaints about pricing to 12% of clients. I think that's probably critical edge for complaints about pricing. And that was the group that won the most outstanding client satisfaction in the enterprise a year later. We changed the conversation. It wasn't about what do you need us to build you in technology. It's like, what are you trying to accomplish? How can we help you do it better and faster? Truly transformed the culture and the conversation. Then price became irrelevant. So, again, is that a good specific? I've got about 20 of them, but I'll play off that story that we already used. Is that helpful to everybody? Yeah, okay. So here's the determining the value worth investing. What's the most important, objective and subjective? And I say objective and subjective because what I always say is subjective metrics measured consistently produce an objective trend. So if we're talking customer satisfaction, we're talking employee satisfaction, we're talking any of those kinds of soft metrics, as long as you measure them regularly, you start to see a trend. Are we getting better? Are we getting worse? And subjective evaluations are sometimes pretty significant. So here's some questions you can use. Are these options consistent with your most important priorities and results? You realize what we're getting them to see is what they're usually asking for is not going to give them what they're actually needing. And sometimes you get them to the point of asking that. Rob, you seeing we're not probing? They're starting to get revelations. And those are called clarity about what really matters instead of like, oh my gosh, why I keep asking for this when that's what matters. Assuming we would achieve these results, what would that be worth to your business? Measurable, objective, subjective ways. Because the more they can quantify it around something that's really, truly meaningful, the more value you know you're creating. You're not coming up with the value. They're coming up with the value. But you're helping them through the process to really understand what's going on here. Given that we deliver these results, what kind of improvements and increases would you normally expect over what you normally do? Somebody's not, I've got high-performing organizations. Most of my clients are really smart and really successful. But those are the ones who know better than anybody else that they could be even more successful. So those are good clients. So they already assume a certain level of growth, a certain level of impact, a certain level of improvement. What I'm asking them is, how much better could it be? You know, we're used to 12% growth. Why not 15 or 18? What, you could do that? Let's not talk about what we can do. Let's talk about what you need. Totally changes the conversation. Make sense? Common sense? How's that for a mantra? Make sense? Common sense? Yeah. So here's the other part. So assuming you failed to do what you say is most important, what happens then? Let's look at both sides. What would you achieve if you made it? What would it cost you if you didn't? Now we're at the both extremes. Those are the two most powerful points of reference for creating value. What's your biggest opportunity? What's your biggest challenge? And then here, what's the highest value results you'd prioritize as our focus? Because they probably gave you 20 things. Isn't that true? Maybe you're lucky they only gave you 8 or 10. But what are the top 3? I know, you know, they actually commonsensically know. If we're working on priorities number 1, 2, and 3, we're going to be far more successful than if we're working on priorities 1 to 10. So let's do what common sense says. And when we're successful, how is this going to affect your bottom line and overall capabilities as an organization moving forward? It's not just we're going to improve your sales. We're going to improve your client retention. We're going to improve your customer retention. Your employee retention. But we're going to build a system, a structure, a process, a culture that will sustain and grow over many, many months and years. How much better is that than simply reducing that employee turnover you're saying is what your big issue is? Can I hear a whoa? Okay, now let's do it for you. So value proposition exercise. I want you to get a partner. We can talk about what I call a GC partner. Geographically convenient, I'm sorry. And I'm going to ask you, this is going to be really quick. We have about 6 minutes to do this. So you're going to be able to explain, here's the challenging situation. That you already articulated it in the beginning of the session today, didn't you? So what's the situation and what are you going to do differently? And then I'm going to time you for 3 minutes, and then we're going to switch. All right? Go. You only have one? You only have one?
No, but I want to give her a chance to.
No, that's good.
In the webinar world, we call this the breakout session.
What's that?
In the webinar world, we call this the breakout session.
Yeah, right, right. We have 1 more minute for person 1, 1 more minute for person 1. And switch. You got 3 minutes for the next person. You got 3 minutes for the second person now. We have 45 seconds left, 45 seconds to wrap it up. Megan, can I interrupt you? Would you mind being a mic runner? You did it so great. And wrap up your conversations. Please wrap up your conversations. Please bring your attention to the front of the room. Is anybody here from Newark, New Jersey? Is anyone here from Newark, New Jersey? That usually quiets a room. This is a bunch of speakers.
Can we get everybody's attention, please?
Thank you, Megan. So if you have a way to improve your client impact, value, and results, including getting more business at a higher rate, please say, yes, I do. All right, so I'm going to ask you, what are the questions, comments, or thoughts you have at this point? And I'm going to do that along with the next step, which is really not just looking at how we did with all these things, but we'll come back to that, but also capture your best lessons as we do that. Comments, thoughts, questions? Nick?
First, Steve, thanks a lot. This was really helpful for me. It kind of reframed of, before I was thinking about what other speakers, what the market price is, at schools, and now I'm thinking more of what is it costing a school if a kid drops out? What is it costing a school if a kid commits suicide? Because then it not only affects that one student, but the school culture around. Or what does it cost, a school if a kid gets into a car wreck and gets a DU, or something like that? And how does that affect the school? So I'm thinking in terms of cost, what can I do to make sure that wow, I'm on the spot here. Hello.
It's not about you, right?
No, I know, exactly. But it's about how I can sustain those results that they want to see at their school, and make sure that I can provide the results and sustain that. And that's
Nick,
what
let me point you. You're going in a good direction here, but really what you're saying is that your clients, the schools, are more likely to pay you.
Right.
To help them avoid deaths, suicides, dropouts, and problems with their kids. It's not about what the market's about, it's about what they're about.
Exactly.
So the client's concerns are what gets you hired.
Yeah.
You have to help them get clear about it sometimes, because most of them are overwhelmed.
Right.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you.
Comments, questions? One up front here, our newest member.
I thought that Megan should not say faster and cheaper. I think that there's so much value in how
Right.
to increase customer loyalty that you cheapen your positioning by bringing price and faster and cheaper into it. You're an expert. You're up here. Don't start saying, and I can get you a discount price on this.
No, you're going to get the client retention at a faster rate and at a lower cost. Yeah. She's going to charge more to do that because it's a higher value result. Right.
Even saying much more customer loyalty, I think, just operate at that level.
Yeah. Questions, comments, thoughts? And in particular, how is this going to help you achieve that opportunity that we talked about at the beginning of the session here?
Don't set the microphone on
All right, so I hope this is an appropriate question, but when you talked about determining the value worth investing in, I was just hoping if you could maybe talk a little bit more about that and give like a specific example just to help me clarify that.
Well, let's start to talk. I mean, how many people have a challenge getting a meeting with your clients? Is that an issue for anybody?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So how about what's the value of helping you get twice as many meetings as you're currently getting by being able to open the conversation in a more effective way? What's the value of that? Now tell me how many, I need to understand what's your metrics. How many people are you calling? How many actually talk to you? How many opportunities to quote do you get? Okay, good. So let's talk about, we could probably double that, if not triple that. Let's be modest and conservative. So if we increase that 50%, what would that actually be worth to you in real business? Now we're quantifying that value. Make sense? The other piece about the clients, so 48% of your clients are complaining about price. If we could reduce that by 75%, and we could also at the same time increase your price. I didn't promise them 50, we just managed to do that. What would that be worth? Right, so what's the value of that? So let's see, we've got, there was a budget in the hundreds of millions. And if we could increase our value, I mean, that could be worth, $50, $70 million of revenue, which would make the difference between surviving and not. So, I mean, it's a real number. And that was increasing their prices by 25%, which is what they needed to sustain. So you got to get really specific with them, but that's why the second step, what are the metrics? What are the specific metrics help them to get really clear? And then you start to say, okay, well, let's talk about what that really is worth to make sure that that is worth investing in. Again, it's another validation point that we're in the right place. Don't take their word for it. Make them demonstrate that that's really the right answer. That's the valuable outcome that they want. That's worth more than any other choice we could invest in. Now you know you're working on the right thing that way. Is that helpful? Yes. Okay. Anybody else? Questions, comments? Everybody got some best lessons you can use? All right, so let's wrap this up here then. So deep breath, everybody. You've been on a pretty fast journey here, haven't you? And it seems like it makes sense, and then the question is, how do you hold on to it? Right? Yes or no? Yes. Okay, good. So everybody know the old story of how do you get to Carnegie Hall?
Practice, practice, practice.
Yes, and so here's the key piece. The first thing I want to suggest to you is choose 2 or 3 things you're going to do differently. The second thing I'm going to suggest to you is you start to look at your most successful clients, and you look at the difference between your most successful clients and your average and challenging clients. And you've got to start to make distinctions about what kinds of conversations you have with the best and what kinds of conversations are you not having with your most challenging clients. Because you're going to start to recognize very quickly is your most challenging clients you're talking at and your best clients you're asking. The second thing you're going to start to see is with your best clients, they're talking about what really matters. Your most challenging clients, you're trying to get them to listen to you. Yes or no? Yeah. Yes or no? Yeah, this is obvious. This is the story for all of us, folks. And if you want to be very successful, here's the key. It's all about what? The value you create by facilitating what's most important to them, by changing the perception that they have that, wow, this person not only understands what's important to me, but if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't know what that was myself. Oh my gosh, and I've been asking these other people for all these silly things. I better work with her. Make sense? Common sense? Go forth and prosper. You can all do this. You've all been doing it. Now you've got a little bit more of a map and understanding about how to do it. May you all be very successful.
One more time for Steve Lishansky. Thank you. Fantastic. Steve, you started off by asking us, did we want to change the world? And that was such an inspiring way to kick it off and also wrap it up. Thank you. You really embody this and have delivered so much value to us over the years. So thank you. And Steve, Megan, in your honor, we make a donation to the NSA Foundation to thank you for your generosity and sharing your expertise with us today. One more round of applause for Megan and Steve, please. Yeah, thank you. It takes their time, their energy to come here, and we benefit from that. So we will hopefully see you at our April Video Speaker Showcase. Join us for that. If not, we'll see you here in May 10th for our next meeting. Thank you again, everybody. Have a great weekend. Thank you.
Jeez, I tried to end on time. I didn't realize we had more time.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
So, ladies and gentlemen, if you would be willing to either, if you want to ask or have questions answered, or you'd be willing to actually do an interview about what was valuable for you, please come forward. Happy to do that.
Thank you.
If you want the PowerPoint, you know how to reach me, or you just give me a card with the PowerPoint on it.
Thank you, Steve.